Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, as primary election day approaches, the candidates are making one last push to get their vote out. And strange bedfellows, Redskin owner Dan Snyder and the ACLU on the same side, opposing a decision by the Patent and Trademark Office that Redskin is a disparaging term. What's up with that? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by political consultant Susan Heltemes, Republican National Committee woman Nicolee Ambrose, former county council candidate Robin Uncapher, and the former Maryland House Majority Leader John Hurson. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Even though primary election day is Tuesday, June 24th, plenty of ballots have already been cast during the early voting period that concluded Thursday, June 19th. It's assumed that the majority of primary voters are the so-called political insiders, so it may be hard to gauge how much enthusiasm there is in these early races. But naturally, in a state and a county that is the bluest of Democratic Party blue, most of the media coverage has focused on the Democratic candidates. Now tonight we're going to briefly look at the major races in both parties, and then I'm going to ask the panel for which race is their shocker. John, the race for governor by some reports is already over. Doesn't that type of reporting do a disservice to the candidates and the voting public at large?
You know, Casey, I think it does. I don't think any race is ever over in a state like Maryland. I mean, I think back to Harry Hughes. I mean, Harry Hughes was called the ball in the tall grass between two very, very good candidates, Ted Venetoulis and, Governor. Blair Lee. And he came out of nowhere to win it. So I think it is a disservice. You never know what's going to happen in these races. That said, I mean, Anthony Brown and Ken Ullman look like they're supposed to win this race. But you know, there's a large undecided there, and you know, people need to get out and vote and express their opinion, and I think it is a disservice. I don't think it's fair to people to say it's done.
Okay. Susan, you've spent a lot of time at the polls this past week during the early voting session. What is your sense of the election for governor?
I think it's going to be all about get out the vote effort, and if you look at the turnout thus far, I think that legislative and councilmanic candidates may be bringing out the polls, their voters for everybody, because watching in Silver Spring, the council candidates and the delegate candidates were bringing out people, so it's a whole different story. And I think when Tuesday comes and we know the results Tuesday night, will it be Gensler, will it be Brown, will it be Heather Mazier? It's going to be the best voter turnout ever, I think, in a primary in a while. It's still going to be too low, but get out the vote efforts are going to matter.
That's it. I want to pick up one thing. You talk about the county executive race and the councilmanic. So that's what's driving people to the polls?
Yes.
There's a little interest in the governor's race?
Oh, there is an interest. There is definitely an interest. But the people with the most enthusiasm who come out, and believe me, between District 5 and District 18 and District 20, there are a lot of candidates. So in Silver Spring, you would see people coming up and hugging this council candidate or that delegate.
The competitive races at the lower ends of the ballot drive turnout.
Well, you in an off-year election, you need something to drive people to the polls.
And there's a lot of competitive races.
All right, Nicolee, I'm going to go to you. Now, it's a bit of an unfair question because the Republican Party is at a statistical disadvantage going into the races. And since the defeat of Bob Ehrlich 8 years ago, the Maryland Republican Party seems to be looking for some path to victory. What is your sense about this election?
Well, first of all, we've had some excellent leadership since 2010. Andy Harris has been our leading Republican congressman and anesthesiologist from Johns Hopkins. He's been great on healthcare and representing Maryland and Republicans in D.C. In terms of this exact race, we've got four great people running for governor, and gosh, we would just wish we could combine them all. They've all agreed to unify. We have a unity party Thursday right after the election on June 26th to bring everyone together. Every single candidate has agreed to work together, after the election and have all their supporters support the other person. So I'm looking forward to seeing that happen. But you have to realize Maryland has been a Democratic state since the Civil War. It has never been a Republican state, and we now have more locally elected Republicans than we do Democrats. We're at 161 locally elected Republicans to 150 some Democrats. So our bench is strong. We're coming up. I think you're going to see a big change in the next 8 years. We'll just see which years we make the biggest gains in.
All right, Robin. For Republicans, it seems like the interest is at the upper end of the ticket. But you have a competitive race between several candidates. So, are you seeing is this going to be indicative of the overall enthusiasm for the race because of the upper level candidates?
Well, personally, I'm rooting for Heather Mazur, who I think would be easiest to defeat. I've got nothing against her, but when I read her main platform, it was so clearly going to bankrupt the state that I thought this is the bill that we want to go after. The person who wants the mandatory sick leave, the mandatory health care, the most expensive thing possible to drive all of our businesses over to Virginia.
But John, we're not likely to see Heather Mazur win this race, right?
No, but she's been pretty strong. She's been a strong candidate. She's getting a lot of support. She didn't take, she took the public funding option, which Ellen Sauerberry did many years ago. And it's really energized her campaign, and I think she's getting a lot of.
No,
wait a minute. I want to go to you with this question, because John talked earlier about the Harry Hughes race and how in a three-party race many things could happen. So in a three-party race like this is between Mazur, Anthony Brown, and Gansler, can an upset happen? You got 1 minute.
I think it's unlikely because of what Robin just said. I think Democratic voters across the state are going to say, ooh, this might be attractive, but can we win in November with someone who says, I want to legalize marijuana? I think she is just a little too far to the left.
But let me just argue with you.
We're too far to the left.
Let me argue with Susan just a little bit. I think the people who vote for Heather are going to be people who say, I don't like Anthony Brown and I don't like Gansler.
That's what the commercial
and they
says.
don't think she's going to win, but they're going to vote for her anyway because
and you
they
never
need
know.
an option.
But I want to say something, Casey. In Montgomery County, 4.6% of the Democrats have voted this far, and only 1.4% of the Republicans have voted in early voting. So maybe there is more enthusiasm on our side.
You know what? I don't think that. I think there's a natural reaction that Republicans have fewer candidates to vote in, fewer competitive races to vote in during the primary. I mean, my goodness, the county executive, Jim Shalek, is running unopposed. So you don't have the driving force to get out in June, but you may have a driving force to get out in November.
So are you going to ask about our shockers?
No, I'm saving that, Susan, to the end of this segment. Switching to the Montgomery County executive race, John, how are you going to handicap that race between Ike Leggett, Doug Duncan, and Phil Andrews?
All right, you have an incumbent who's thought of by the electorate. I mean, most of the Democratic electorate has no argument with him. So it was really up to Doug Duncan to make the case. And I'm not sure the case has been made. I think that's the real issue here, is whether or not Duncan has made enough of a case against Ike Leggett to throw him out. Also, Ike has gotten pretty strong endorsements from even the unions, who he battled with for the last 8 years, and he's also got the endorsement of the Washington Post. I mean, I think it's Ike's to lose, but I do think Doug Duncan was a very good county executive, and a lot of people remember the Doug Duncan years as being good years. So it's probably the toughest race to predict.
Do you think Duncan didn't make the argument, or it may be shown that he didn't make the argument, because there just wasn't enough media attention on the race until the last 30 days? I mean, there really hasn't been any attention generally.
No, Casey, I think when you're taking on an incumbent, I think you have to have an argument. You have to, and it has to be made effectively. I mean, Doug seemed to rely on the Silver Spring Transit Center as his centerpiece of the argument against Ike on incompetence, and it didn't stick. and I don't think it's stuck. And from what I'm hearing from candidates who are knocking on doors, talked to one yesterday who'd been knocking on doors. They said, when they have a conversation with people at the door, the case hasn't been made. So I don't know, but I do think there's a lot of.
The case hasn't been made, or people just aren't that upset with Ike.
That's what it is, and I think there's the thing that I cannot measure in my head is the residual respect for Doug Duncan that I do think is in the electorate because they thought he was a good county executive. So the question is, how does that play in their mind when they go?
I think that when voters were talking about it, Doug tried hard, and I would disagree with you. I think there has been much more media on this race than I would have thought. I think it's going to be closer than what people might think. However, when voters start thinking about this race, what they have said is, in fact, a couple of voters put it this way: Ike got us through the hard times. Doug was there when times was flush. He could spend money all over the place. And now the times are good and he wants to come back. But I do think it is going to be much closer than what anybody probably thought in the beginning. And it was interesting at the polls. Ike had very good coverage. Doug had some, and Phil Andrews was not to be seen at the polls at all. So I don't know. I think it may have to do with the size and the number of volunteers, but that's going to be an interesting race to watch.
Well, my next question was really for Nicolee about how do you gauge Republican turnout when you have, as we were just discussing, you have a lot of unopposed races, and the real, I guess, vitriol to be expressed would be in November.
Well, first of all, here in Montgomery County, yes, Jim Shalek might be running unopposed for county executive, but he's a fantastic candidate. We couldn't ask for a stronger or better candidate. Former Department of Justice attorney, so he gets the federal workspace and Montgomery County's role in that environment. He's tough on crime, great prosecutor. He gets it. And we have 47% of Marylanders considering leaving the state. And obviously Montgomery County is the bulwark against that if we don't want to lose every last bit of business to Virginia. So I think he's fantastic, but obviously that will matter in November in the general. Statewide, we have some very interesting races regionally. We have our hottest race in the state.
I want you to hold that because that's for the shocker moment.
All right.
So hold that. And let me go to Robin because then we got about a minute to wrap this up.
I think Jim Shalek really is a fantastic candidate. He is a world-class prosecutor. He is a world-class guy. Anybody who knows him really knows it. And I'll tell you, when people say no Republican could win, I say I've lived in New York City when Rudy Giuliani won. So,
all right,
anything
we got 1 minute left, so I'm going to start with Nicolee. Who's your shocker?
The hottest Republican race in the state is the Anne Arundel County Executive primary race. That they've raised more money there than we have in the gubernatorial race.
Susan.
The District 18 legislative race, that is the most fascinating to watch. I live there, as does John. That's going to be an interesting one to watch Tuesday night.
John.
I'd say the AG's race. I think Brian is going to take it. He's been behind for the entire race, but he's caught up with John Carden, and I think he's going to surpass him, and it's going to be a surprise.
Robin.
And for the primary, I wouldn't say. I think Jim Shalek is going to be the big upset.
Well, that's real easy, Robin. He's unopposed.
He's running unopposed, but
shocker.
I'll tell you. No, but you know what?
My shocker. We got to go to break. My shocker is you're going to be surprised at how strong the turnout is for Phil Andrews. I think there's a hidden support. All the anti-votes are going to Phil. When we come back from this short break, should the federal government get involved in the naming of private property, businesses, and even states? And welcome back. Like the drum beats along the Mohawk, the effort to have the Washington Redskins football team change its name are growing ever louder. For several months now, those who seek to have the name replaced have been waging an ever-increasing media and political battle to force team owner Daniel Snyder and the National Football League to submit to their wishes. Excuse me. While defenders of the name have been equally aggressive in vowing that the name will never change. But this week, in what surely many have been calling a game-changing moment, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, in a split 2-1 decision, ruled that the term Redskin was disparaging and federal law prohibits trademark protection of such terms. Wait a minute. According to a report in the Washington Post, the most unlikely of allies, the American Civil Liberties Union, have questioned whether PTO should be allowed to find this type of speech offensive. ACLU Legislative Counsel Gabe Rotman has said, nothing, say this about the government's move to effectively and for all practical purposes deny the Washington Redskins the use of their trademark logo and the name. At first blush, it might seem obvious that PTO should have the ability to deny registration to racist or vulgar trademarks. But as with all things with free speech, who gets to decide what's racist or vulgar? That's right, the government. And the government is ill-equipped to make these kind of determinations. Whoa, big statement there. John, there are hundreds, even thousands of products and businesses, and even 20 states have Indian names. Should the federal government be in the business of telling people what they can do with these trademarks?
Okay, so first of all, let's get a couple of things distinct here. This is actually not about free speech, because the issue is the Redskins can still use this name, they can still call them the Redskins. That's not what happened here. It's not about free speech. It's about whether or not government protections, a registration of a trademark, is going to be able to be used in a court case over licensing and whether or not stuff is being, the name is being misused. Dan Snyder and the Redskins have all common law rights to continue to defend their use and to go into court and stop people from using the Redskins name. And they probably win. So it's not about free speech. They can continue to do that. It's about whether or not the government protection of that particular trademark, and we're all the government, okay? So whether or not we think it's okay to allow that kind of name to be used. That's the question, and that's fine. But it's not about free speech, and I just want to make that distinction. Second thing I really want to say is the Redskins name is going to change. I mean, times are changing. At some point, the NFL owners are going to say to Dan Snyder, look, this is a pooled finance system for them. And if all of a sudden they're losing money, they're going to say to him, call them the Washington Warriors, call them something else. But they're all going to sort of get into this. And what's going to change the name is not all this pressure, but frankly, the financial pressure from NFL owners.
Okay, that's one way of looking at it. We'll find out what the others think. Nicolee, Republican candidate for governor Larry Hogan has responded in defense of the name. But why would he want to be caught up in this mess?
Well, I applaud Larry, but I would suggest the only mess made here has been by USPTO for wading in and creating the problem. I also have to applaud ACLU for getting involved. I do think they are very natural allies on this issue. And I hope everyone's ready for a big stream of changes if we're going to cede ground so easily. Hello, Chicago Blackhawks. Hello, Fighting Illini. Hello, White Sox. Who's to say I am not offended by someone calling me white or Caucasian? There is a long list of things anyone could decide might be offensive, and I do not think it is appropriate in this situation.
Susan, hasn't political correctness in this sense gone too far? I mean, the government really shouldn't be in the business of defining what's racist and what's a slur. Shouldn't society come to those conclusions on their own?
Well, this challenge.
Do you really want a pointy-headed bureaucrat?
No, wait a minute. There is a couple of times that there's been a challenge and they've not been addressed. This challenge, though, was addressed, as John said. Times are changing. Very few people probably know that there is a 30% threshold that must be met, and if the 30% threshold is met, the people find it offensive, the name is changed. Interestingly, very few people know that in 1933 that 30% threshold was made, but it was easier for the PTO back then to say, we don't care.
Susan, the dissent in the trademark case pointed out that the petitioners really didn't provide substantial or good evidence that there was to meet that 30% threshold.
In 1933, it was met, and today, if you went out there, I can guarantee you it's high. I know, and what they're saying is the government made a mistake then, we're going to correct it now.
Robin.
I actually agree with both. I agree with the ACLU because I don't believe that the government should be making this decision. On the other hand, I do believe it's pejorative and it should be changed. And I think here's the test. The test is you ask the group that's being talked about. If you ask Canadians if Canuck is offensive, you can go by what they tell you. And if you ask Indians whether Redskins is offensive, they will tell you it is. because in any other context, it is an offensive term. So that's why.
Well, I am getting the tomahawk signal from my floor producer who says, time is out. Stay tuned for parting shots.
And it's gonna, the
Maybe
name's
that was a
gonna
karate
change.
chop.
And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Susan Heltemes.
I want to encourage everybody to vote on Tuesday. In early voting, Baltimore County led the way, followed by Prince George's, and then Montgomery County. Montgomery County, get out there and vote. John alluded to this. There is a reason we should all get out and vote, and that is Brian Frosch. Brian Frosch deserves to be Attorney General. Montgomery Countyans, get out there and vote. Vote Brian Frosch. And let's show the state that we lead the way in voting.
Thank you, Susan. Nicolee Ambrose, your parting shot.
Thank you. A recent poll found that 47% of Marylanders are looking at leaving the state. 17% of them are interested in leaving in the next year. So yes, it's election season, and I am encouraging everyone to vote for a true two-party state. We're ranked 49th out of 50 for worst business environment. So let there be a level playing field, get rid of the cronyism, and let's not have 80 more taxes and fees in the next 8 years. Please consider voting Republican and making for a two-party system. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicolee. Robin Uncapher, your opportunity to give a parting shot.
I wanted to compliment the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Montgomery County Police for relocating a bear found on NIH property. And the reason I say this is because we had a bear walk down the street 7 years ago, and when we called the police, they didn't do anything. So clearly, and the Department of Natural Resources told us that it would probably swim back across the river. So I was very pleased to see that the policies changed and they now take wild animals and put them back in the wild.
Thank you, Robin. Now, John, I'm going to allow you to give the final party shot because I've been accused by the women on the panel of being a male sexist pig and giving you the favored position. So, John, you have a full 2 minutes tonight.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank the other women panelists. They've done an excellent job tonight. And Casey, despite his being so favorable to the only male on the panel, they've really held their own as a team, and they've done a great job. That's number one shout out. Number two shout out is, frankly, to all the candidates. It is very hard to run for public office, and the fact is you did it. You've done a great campaign. Some of you are going to win, and some of you are going to lose. To the winners, you got a lot of work to do. The state needs a lot of help and a lot of work. To the losers, stay involved. I lost my first race, and it's important to stay in there and to be active in your party. And I actually agree with my Republican panelists here. We need a two-party system in this state. It helps all of us. So stay active if you do lose. Many people lost the first time. And they kept at it, and they ran again, and they won, and they've served their state well. So please stay active. To the winners, good luck, because there's a lot to do. So,
thank you, John. Now, I want to remind everybody that Montgomery Community Media is going to lead the way in election night coverage. So I encourage everyone to tune in to Channel 21 for election evening coverage. And if you don't like what I say, well, you can watch the television that night and yell at it and think that Mike Knapp or someone else is even smarter. I want to thank the panel for being here tonight. Thank you for watching, and thank you for watching Montgomery County's hardest-hitting political talk show. Until then, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and you can even watch us on YouTube. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.